I'm Jeannette Sutton,
And I'm Eddie Bertola.
and we welcome you to another episode of The Alerting Authority. And as always, we encourage you to subscribe, follow, listen, and most importantly, participate in these podcasts. We want your questions, concerns, ideas, problems, pain points, and success stories so we, as alerting authorities, can do better at our jobs and make our community safer.
And with that, we want to thank our sponsors, and Everbridge is sponsoring this one. And Everbridge is used by more than 6,500 global organizations to keep people safe and reduce disruption during operations. They help leading enterprises and government organizations across the globe build digital and physical resilience by using their industry-leading solutions. Today, their high-velocity CEM platform, powered by purpose-built AI, sets a world standard for business resilience. With Everbridge, customers can confidently anticipate, mitigate, respond to, and recover from critical events. And with all of that said, Jeanette, I am really excited to tell you about our guest today, who's on the screen for those that are watching on YouTube, but for those that are just listening in their car. We have someone that I have known for a number of years. She probably has more dirt on me than anyone else that I've ever worked with in the alerting world. And what I mean, of course, there isn't any, but if there would be dirt, she would have some, I'm sure. We've had late night calls dealing with emergency incidents. We've been through some pretty traumatic type events together, and this person is, you know, let me just give you her background, and then we'll talk a little bit more about her. But Carri, she retired on May 1st. That was her Liberation Day of 2025. After almost 35 years with the Washington State Patrol, right? Is
That
that a
is
nod?
correct.
Yes.
Yes,
Cannot believe it.
I know.
35. I'm just thinking where the time has gone. But she began in 1991 as a communications officer or dispatcher, and then traveled this pretty cool path to essentially lead the alert program for her state. And we'll go into some of those nuances because I don't want to steal it. But she has provided a lot of training throughout her state for dispatch, for troopers, communication staff, partner stakeholder agencies, and has developed training programs that have gone national as well. She served as the facilitator for the Leadership in Police organization, teaching ethics and conflict management. She has done different things with youth in crisis. And again, her time as a dispatcher really gives her a perspective that I don't even have from that. And so it lends to a lot of the training. But in her last 12 years, where she had to work with me a whole lot more, Carri was the state Amber Alert coordinator and the manager of the Missing and Unidentified Persons Unit. She worked over 100 Amber Alerts and hundreds of other cases because there are many more cases that just don't qualify that we still do stuff with. She also helped develop within her state multiple alert programs, such as the Endangered Missing Persons, Silver, Blue, and the most recent one, the Missing Indigenous Persons Alert. And that is just within her state. Now, what's really cool about her and what she's done since is working with the Ashanti Alert program. So she is currently the lead subject matter expert for the Ashanti Alert program. And it's something that I think we've touched on a little bit as we've talked about all the different alerts. But this is something that post retirement has really been her focus. And she is out on the national stage talking about this and the ins and outs. So with all of that, I know that's a lot of information, but I want to say welcome, Carri, and I'm happy that you're on our show.
And I'm grateful for being here. Thank you for having me.
Well, that was a great introduction, Eddie, and I'm excited to learn more about the ins and outs of how you got to where you are, Carri, because your path, it seems unique. You started with dispatching and alerting programs for your state, and now you're at this national level. Can you walk us through your journey and how you developed your expertise in alert and public warning?
Sure. So I started in dispatch, as Eddie mentioned, and as you can imagine, technology back then was extremely limited, and we didn't know anything about missing person alerting. Amber wasn't a thing. There wasn't anything even like that. So the way that we shared information back then was by telephone or fax machine or however method we could get the information out. We didn't even have email back then. So um, and why that's important is because when the Amber Alert law was signed into Washington state in 2004, we really had no idea what we were doing. I helped at the time that there was a committee formed to determine how Washington was going to implement that plan. And part of that was trying to figure out how we were going to share information. And so what we did with that is we determined the best course for sharing information. And then as things moved out, we had the checklist. We had, you're going to call the local agencies and you're going to fax photos and you're going to do all of those steps and whatnot. And so that's where we started. And then we had to train law enforcement all around the state, almost 200 law enforcement agencies in Washington state, including their dispatchers, because as you know, that's the first call that comes in. And so I became very familiar with criteria, with methods, and then from the other side of things, alerting and the determination at that point was made at the local level. So we didn't have any say about whether it was an Amber Alert or not. We just pushed out the information. And then as things evolved, and after I became the alert coordinator and the manager of the missing persons unit, we looked at some necessary technology changes at the time because things had evolved. And even when I took that job in 2012, we were still allowing local agencies to send out their own alerts. So we had to look at some revisions to process, to procedure, and that's where things started to get the ball rolling to where we are today. That
Well, and
answer?
it's
And when local organizations were sending out their own alerts, what does that mean? Like they were faxing messages to each other, or what kind of technologies were they using?
So we first started using a program called LEAP. It was Law Enforcement Alerting Portal, and it was provided at the time to law enforcement at no cost. So our agencies in our state actually had the capability of logging into LEAP, which the training for that was all provided by us, but they could log in, they could enter the missing person information and actually hit the disseminate button on their own. So they could send out alerts whenever they determined it was an alert. And so there was really no check and balance, there was no process control, there was no structure. So, and then imagine trying to keep hundreds of law enforcement agencies and users up to date and current with passwords, logins, training. And then that program that we used, LEAP, was extremely limited into what we could do with it. So there were a lot of hoops we had to jump through to try to figure out a better way.
I have one more question, Eddie,
go for it.
because
Go.
this is all new to me because I haven't lived in this space and you have for so many years. When you say alert, who's actually receiving the alert?
At the time, it was mostly media because we had no way of implicating a subscriber list to direct to the public. We relied on the media. We relied on local law enforcement, be on the lookouts, attempt to locate whatever their process was. So again, we had, at the time, there was always the reverse 911 option was there. But again, that all was controlled at the local level. So there was no state level oversight. We attempted to have state level oversight by requiring an after action report. But then we determined over the years that kind of trickled down and there wasn't a lot of participation in that. So again, that sparked yet another reason why we needed some reform to the system.
Yeah. So this LEAP system is pushing information out to other law enforcement agencies and to the media. And the media gets to choose whether or not they're going to actually share that information with the public. But the media were kind of your intermediaries to get that information out so that the public could actually be partners in helping to find missing persons.
Right. That is correct.
Cool. All right.
And one thing that's cool, and I mean, you've been doing this for over 35 years. I think you started at the age of 8 or 10 doing this.
I wish.
Is there's the hard way and then there's the easier way to learn. And for you and I, we were not given the opportunity that a lot of people who are just starting this have. And what I mean by that is we have science now. We have research that's been done so that we can adjust the way that we send alerts, the contents of the alert, and all those things to make it really effective. You didn't have that, and I did not have that. And so understanding that journey, because when we started, it was, and let me just go before, because I know Jeanette's probably gonna be like, well, like, a lot of research has been there. We were not given that, and I didn't know where to look for it. And it definitely isn't as available as it is now. So for people listening out there, I think it's important to understand that your path was similar to mine, right? Where we're doing the best we can, the limited information we can. And so I just wanted to ask you what was your journey in this aspect of how did you go from I'm doing the best I can to I'm starting to reach and get the practices or the research or trying to make your stuff a better quality, if that makes sense.
There were several things. And again, I think the phrase that comes to mind as you were talking is trial and error. We made a lot of mistakes. And while that was, just in our state, at the time there was no communication with other states, no no relationships, I guess, for lack of a better word. We had no idea what was going on in other states. And that was one thing I really wanted to bring to the table is I'm like, why are we doing something in a vacuum? We need to be communicating outside of our state and find out what other states are doing. There are better ways of doing everything. So let's figure this out. But I can think of several times where it was trial and error and just kind of figuring it out. And then when I personally started to reach out, that is when I found, the Amber Alert Training and Technical Assistance Program, Fox Valley, which allowed for that networking opportunity. So that's how I got kind of to that level. And then, relationship building with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I participated in a rewrite of a best practices guide way in the, I want to say 2017, 2016 timeframe. Um, you're nodding your head because you remember.
I
Um,
remember.
and so that also helped me to know and be kind of share my, this is what I did and this didn't work or this did work. And talking with people like Eddie, and his state having a massively larger population than Washington state, you have to be reaching more people. What are you doing? And so it was stuff like that that really kind of enhanced the program, at least for Washington state anyway.
Well, and learning from trial and error, in case anybody is thinking, man, that sounds fun. That's not fun. That and that's where we have multiple groups that are listening to this. For those that have been doing this a long time, this counts to you. For those that have just started or want to do this in the future, use the resources that are available now so that you don't have to go through that trial and error. Because while there were a lot of things that I think we learned and we discovered and that ended up being really effective, it's cool now that people can start with that baseline foundation and already just be that much further ahead within their own organizational programs. So, um, I would say, and I think we're going to touch on it just a little bit, but if there were some of those early lessons or anything that really shaped as you started alerting, um, I know you and I have talked about tragedies in the past. Um, and I think for people listening, we can talk about successes and there are many, and I love all of them. But the ones that I remember, like to this day, and I can tell you names and dates, are the ones we didn't get back alive. And it's those types of situations that I think, at least for me, really impacted the development of the alerting program because it helped my drive. And I just wanted to ask if it was similar for you.
Yeah, two cases come to mind, and I just thought of them as you were talking. And the learning lessons that we took away from both of these cases kind of have carried through, and I think on a lot of levels in a lot of states. The first one is our very first Amber Alert that was ever activated in Washington state was for a 5-year-old who vanished. She just disappeared out of her front yard or off the sidewalk in front of her home. And at the time, Amber was new and it was a new tool. And so we activated that alert. And that was back in, I believe it was 2006, I believe. And that child has still never been found. And to say at the time, that we tried everything we could is a great thing to fall back on. But in reality, the alert wouldn't have and didn't assist in any way. The media had already covered the case. It was very out there. And we've had others along the way in our state that were very similar where they disappeared with no circumstances. So what I took away from that and what I share in my training is make sure that you have something to give to the public. And, Eddie and I talk about this in our training, and I talk about it all the time is, do you have enough information to give to the public that you're going to get information back to help you locate this child? And if all you have is a photograph in 2006, that's not going to be helpful to get your information out to the public. And so if that case were to happen today, and they do, sadly, that would not qualify as an Amber Alert. And now, thankfully, we have other tools, but, at the time, that's what we had to fall back on. And then the other case is the unfortunate case of Jeannette, who was abducted and murdered in the city of Tacoma. There was an Amber Alert issued for her. However, there were significant delays in getting that Amber Alert issued for several reasons. Not on our case, that was at the time when the agency was activating their own alert. And that was this typical stereotypical abduction where she was, and you cannot write this any more stereotypical. She was abducted from an alleyway behind her home on the 4th of July in a white van. They had the license plate. It was witnessed by her siblings. They had everything. And unfortunately, they just didn't get the alert out in time. We didn't have the tools at the time or whatever the case may have been, but she was murdered and the suspect was found, but not as a result of the alert. So those stick with me. Time is critical from the Jeannette case. It needs to get out as quickly as possible. We do not have time to lose. And then the first case of having enough information.
Well, Carrie, when you say give people information to act on, but a photo's not enough, what do you mean? What kind of information do you need to help people to take action?
I think if the cases where the child disappears with no suspect, no witnesses, no anything, I think we need current clothing, current hairstyle, like a photograph that was taken with the child wearing those clothes. Just something specific to look for. And a photograph of the child, if it's showing the current clothing, is enough in my mind. But we just need enough. We need something to give to the public. And a lot of agencies take that to mean I have to have a suspect or I have to have a vehicle. And that's not the case. We have to have enough to give to the public that it's going to be valuable to them to help us. And a school photo from 8 months ago is not going to be helpful. And so that's just the decision-making kind of triangle that we try to go off of.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful because if timeliness is really important for these cases. And so providing information about most recently seen, most recently known to look like would be really useful for people if you want us to get up out of our chairs and go out and look for the person who might be in the backyard or in a vehicle nearby. So I think that's critical information for people to understand that they need to have those kinds of details to share with the public. Um, so you talked about these examples that were just really tragic, but you've also been part of activations where the stakes are really high and everything came together. So can you tell us some stories about times where you know that this was successful, people came together, that an alert played a role in this? Like, what was that like?
Um, well, I can honestly say that those immediate recoveries as a direct result of the alert didn't really start to impact us until WEA came into the picture, the wireless emergency alerts. The very first wireless alert that we activated, um, I could almost do an entire podcast on that. But suffice it to say, it should not have gone out when it did, but it did. And the it was an out of state abduction, so it was from Montana to Washington State. It went out in the early hours of the morning, and the child was recovered after we got significant complaints all the way up to our governor's office. The child was recovered because somebody did remember that vehicle description from their phone at 3 o'clock in the morning and went to work at 5 a.m. and saw that vehicle in the parking lot of their apartment complex and called it in. They were sleeping in their car in an apartment complex in Fife, Washington. Um, and we tried to, use that information with the public to say, hey, this does work. No, we don't necessarily want to wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning. But in this case, this child needed to be found immediately. And they thankfully were, several hours after the alert was activated. The other times I can tell you where we came into play, there was a time where we activated the alert and a trooper was behind the car and called into dispatch and said, hey, I'm following that vehicle right now, and was able to instigate a traffic stop. And that's less than 5 minutes after we, pushed the button, for lack of a better word, and that child was safely recovered. And then we've had success stories with the public calling in saying, I'm behind that vehicle. And it's just mind blowing how quickly these can end because of that tool.
Mhm. Yeah, I think Eddie's shared stories like that before too, where someone was not supposed to be on their phone, and so they were texting instead. Texting a response to Eddie about being behind the car and what do I do? And I mean, it's amazing the power that WEA has if people get a message that they can read and make sense of at the time when they receive it, and it's actionable. And so that license plate information, the vehicle description that was included in those messages, it helped people to take action immediately.
Absolutely. You got to give them information to know what they're looking for. And if there's a vehicle involved, obviously that's going to be the most obvious thing. But we've evolved since then, even. So,
I again, Carrie and I can go back and forth on whose recoveries have been the quickest. And I know it's one of those, hey, we're down to 3 minutes, or we got ours in 5 or 2. It's back and forth, and ultimately, the ones who win are those that are being recovered. It's just amazing how much quicker it can be. And I think, Jeanette, you said it along with Carrie, when you give our communities actionable information, right? But you give them the quality and completeness of what you're asking them to do. Because if you're just trying to tell them that a horrible thing happened, then that doesn't help the situation at all. It's really, what can you do to make a difference, to give people the information so they can make a choice of whether or not they're going to jump into this. And it is individual. So there are some pretty cool stories, and you may touch on some of those. I don't want to give any away if you want to. I want to ask about different challenges or lessons, and this isn't where an activation has ended up where we don't recover the child alive. This deals more on that technical side because tools have changed, operations have changed, um, the way the policies have changed. And you mentioned how even sending off the wireless emergency alert in the early hours of the morning, which we've done too. It's that trial and error going, hey, there's a better way. And then we adjust to that better way. But has there been anything that stands out, whether it's operational or technical, or how you communicated with other stakeholders to where you're like, hey, we saw this was a challenge, but we did it this way. And it ended up being like we figured something out?
that is a tough question. Um,
I'm known for those, Carrie. Come
Yeah,
on.
you are.
You know.
Um, I can't think of a case where we specifically made a mistake that ended up being working in
Or
our
even
favor.
if there's a challenge or something that you're like, "Hey, our process is struggling. We need to let's look at it." And it doesn't have to be related to a specific case, but something to where you recognized we need to make an adjustment. What's been a big part of your process or something where you're like, "We're doing this." And if I can kind of put one out there, I remember when you started sending your own wireless emergency alerts, right?
Yes.
That we have a lot of people that listen that rely on NECMEC or others to send their alerts, which again, my agency did too for a while. But then we made that decision. We're going to get trained and we're going to send them because we want to be responsible for our community. Did you go through a similar thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, we, with the passage of the Missing Indigenous Person Alert, is where everything changed for us technology wise. That was the only alert passed in our state that came with any funding at all. And as part of that funding, we were able to purchase new software. Up until that point, we were relying on email list serves and NECMEC for our WEAs, as you mentioned. And it was just kind of discombobulated. The systems were kind of all over the place. And so, with that funding, we were able to purchase our own software license to be able to activate our own wireless emergency alerts. So, that came with also a lot of changes where we centralized the alerting process. We took it out of the hands of our dispatch centers, out of the hands of local law enforcement, and put it with my unit that I worked in at the time, my team. So, four people instead of potentially hundreds are the only ones now who have the capability of logging in and activating an alert. The decision about criteria being met is in collaboration with local law enforcement. We're not the decision makers 100% on that piece, but we are the only ones who have the capability of sending that message out. And that really, really helped with consistency, with the decision making being, all on the same page a lot of the times. And it changed everything, I believe. And training is so much more um, efficient with four people than traveling around the state trying to train hundreds of dispatchers and law enforcement officers.
Yeah, and for anybody who's ever tried to train dispatch or law enforcement, bless your heart. And I mean that is one of the most difficult groups to train anything. And you can rag on me for saying that. I am one of them. I know how hard we are to train. So yeah, going back to the four people, it's got to be much easier. You talked about the consistency. I think the quality of your alerts definitely increased because you could focus on those key things that you needed to put in. Um, and again, just sponsorship, right? And when it comes to software, and you mentioned that you had to go through the process to get some, um, it is not just about sending that message, right? Because you want to make sure the right people get the right information at the right time. And so that's where Everbridge can help, right? From global enterprises to government agencies. They will help you stay ahead of any disruption and protect what matters most. And to touch on again, they have that high velocity CEM platform and using purpose built AI instead of just general reach from wherever, and they will help you anticipate the risks, communicate clearly, and just recover faster when critical events occur. And so it can be severe weather, operational disruptions, or a major incident. Everbridge gives leaders the confidence to act quickly and decisively. So if resilience matters to your organization, which the answer should be yes to everybody, Everbridge can help you in achieving this global standard. So you can learn more at everbridge.com.
We did go with Everbridge too, by the way.
There you go, there's a plug.
I'm just want to make that make that out there, make that clear.
Well, they are a very large company
Yeah.
and adopted by a lot of organizations. Let's transition a little bit to what you're currently doing. You know, when the Amber Alert rolled out, I don't even what year was that? When was the Amber Alert program put into place?
In our state, it was in 2004. I think it was between like 2002, 2005, 6 timeframe.
But at the national level, it was much earlier, wasn't it? No? Boy. So I had these memories of being a kid and looking at missing persons pictures on the milk cartons. But that wasn't Amber. That was just that was missing persons. Okay. Well, watching these different programs
Sorry,
transition.
Jeanette. Yeah. Milk
What?
carton, for those that don't know, milk used to come. I know. I only say that laughing because I like my kids are going to be like, what? A what? A what? But it's like a real thing. I mean, I grew up with it too.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
they're like these paper. Okay, let me describe it. It's like a box. It's a cylinder and it's made out of paper with a waxy substance on the outside, and the paper is printed with the label of the milk company. And on the back of it, there was a picture frequently of a person who was missing and their description. And I don't know if it was at a state level or a national level that these missing persons pictures were shared, but they were on your milk carton. So if you sat down at breakfast and you're having your bowl of cereal, it could be Wheaties or it could be Captain Crunch or whatever. Dating myself on that probably too. But, the milk carton sits on the table in front of you. And back then, years ago, when we didn't have social media and other stuff to read while we were sitting at the breakfast table, we would read what's in front of us. And sometimes it was the milk carton. So it was a great way to share that information in a really personalized manner because it's actually like in your kitchen on your table and you see it. So, okay, milk cartons. That was your little lesson for anybody who's as old as I am.
you're not old. No, that's not what I'm.
Oh, that's funny. Okay, Ashanti, the Ashanti program. I don't know if there was a missing persons kind of a program that existed before Ashanti, but it's newer and it's really unfamiliar to people who have not had the education to understand it. So, can you tell us what an Ashanti alert is, why it's an important addition to the alerting landscape, and why don't we use plain language? Why is it Ashanti? What's it all about?
So I'm really happy to clarify this because this is a misnomer and misunderstanding around the country to a lot of people. And so I'm grateful to be able to explain. So the Ashanti Alert Initiative was signed into law in 2018 at the federal level based on a case of a missing young adult named Ashanti Billy. And so that's where the name came from. In Ashanti's case, she was abducted from Virginia and found in North Carolina. So there was about a 350-mile stretch where, she was abducted from and to. So the need was identified to establish an information sharing network amongst states. So that was the bill that was signed into law. And once the act came to be and there was funding associated with it, one of the very first things that they did was to go out and poll states to find out if they had existing programs that met or exceeded what the Ashanti Act was intended to accomplish. And they, at the time, kind of the feeling is that states didn't already have missing adult programs, that there were silver and there was amber, and that was it. And that was just not the case. States had missing adult alerts or missing alerts that covered this demographic of what we're trying to talk about, but they had different naming conventions. They weren't called Ashanti. They were called endangered missing persons. They were called purple alerts, I guess, for the missing with disabilities, or, you had various alert names around the country, but they all covered that criteria that was identified in the Ashanti Alert Act. So for states like mine, Washington, part of the Ashanti Act said that it should cover the cases of an abducted adult. So all we had to do in Washington was add the word abduction to our criteria for an endangered missing, and we met that threshold of being an Ashanti type alert. So states that have named Ashanti alerts, I believe we're at 3 or 4 right now that around the country that call them Ashanti alerts. Um, but the states that did that at the local level. They were enacted by those states' legislative process. The Ashanti Alert Act did not say you have to call your alert an Ashanti alert. It was intended to provide guidance to law enforcement agencies that did not already have, like us, that language regarding abductions, or maybe they didn't have a missing adult program at all, and they used this guideline to establish their own. So, and there is no, again, there's no requirement to call any missing adult alert that is not an amber or a silver Ashanti. It's just the network and the act was intended to help guide states to establish those programs if they didn't already have one.
That's super helpful. But you also named you named a couple of other alerts in there as you were going through, because there's dozens of
Yes.
different alerts and different states have different programs that they've adopted. Can you explain Silver? Is Silver also a national program? And okay.
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt. In fact, this has been a discussion at the Ashanti table this past couple years is who's in charge of this Silver Alert program. And there is not a Silver Alert initiative at the national level. So what we're trying to do with Ashanti, because we do have that act at the national level, we're trying to kind of tie in a lot of these Silver Alert programs to our training, proposed training or proposed outreach to states. We're trying to help them and guide them if they have any training needs with regard to those alerts. Because again, there is nobody at the national level. We've reached out to the Alzheimer's Association. They were involved in Washington when we established ours with developing criteria. We've reached out to AARP to see if they manage it, and there's just no national level guidance point, I guess, for the Silver Alert program.
And Silver alerts are for older adults, 65 and up?
It depends on the state.
Okay.
In general, I've seen states with 55 and up. I've seen states with 60 and up. In Washington, it was 65. So it's variable. It's all over the
Mhm.
place.
And you mentioned Alzheimer's. So it's not an abduction related issue. It's something else that the older adult is missing.
Um, some states don't require the dementia piece that the Alzheimer's Association deals with. If the person is in danger because of a medical issue, it could be lack of medication. It could be another health issue, diabetes or, a life-threatening illness. That's the criteria that we like to focus on, not necessarily dementia, but I use the phrase quite often, and I'm sure my team back in the missing persons unit got tired of hearing me say it, but if the person cannot return to safety without assistance, they qualify, period. If they are not able to return on their own for whatever reason, dementia, cognitive disability, physical disability, mental health disability, something, then they would qualify for these alerts.
Thank you. I think that it's really important for us to recognize not only the number of different types of alerts, but also to understand what they each mean. Um, you know, when I first met Eddie, he was collecting all of the alerts at the state level, and even since then, the last couple of years, more have been added. And so, having a library of those alerts to understand what different states do and the criteria that go along with each of them, I think it's really important for local alerting authorities to see what their state does and understand the criteria. And then something we were starting to talk about, which maybe we'll get to later, is the importance of the language of even describing those people with the inability to return home safely, which really helps to kind of explain why it's so important that people help at the time that the alert is received. So, yeah. So, as we've been talking about these different kinds of alerts. Why do you think that state and local alerting authorities should be paying attention to Ashanti alerts right now?
Well, I think they compose the majority of our missing person cases are adults, or our long-term missing cases are adults. That is the bulk of missing person cases that go for an extended period of time or are usually largely kind of forgotten about. The theory is if you're an adult, allowed to go missing, or um, it's not illegal to be missing. It's not against the law to be missing until there's a crime, which a lot of these missing persons cases end up having a crime element. But at the time they go missing, there's no crime normally, a lot of times. So, we try to educate law enforcement that this is a tool for them to use if they believe that the alert or the person can't return on their own or if the alert will help. So,
And is there a sense that some organizations are not ready? No.
I think no, I think there's just a misunderstanding about how the process works, where to go, who's going to do it for me. Is there, um, do I have to have certain forms, guidance? There's a lot of just misunderstanding at the local level about what their options are, which is what we're trying to close that gap.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which I think a lot of that misunderstanding can play into the fact that, again, we have so many different alerts out there and who's responsible for them. Again, in California, it was the silver alert. It's for everybody 65 years or older, unless they have a cognitive impairment, physical disability. And so, I mean, we've done a silver alert for a 3-year-old. And it makes sense based on the legislation. But if you're asking anybody in the public, it is absolutely confusing to them. They're like, that's not a silver alert because silver alert should mean this or the other thing. And and so I absolutely see the confusion. And what I appreciate with the Ashanti Alert program that they're working on is what we're hearing about now from, I would say, the Ashanti program comes after a few years of them trying to develop what it should be. What are the talking points? What does the training look like? What is the information sharing? The group that Carrie has been sitting in and being the subject matter expert for. I mean, Carrie, this has been going on for a while, right? This is not. I mean, help me out. Like the process has been pretty um, thorough. Is that correct?
With Ashanti,
Huh.
our focus with Ashanti, to be quite honest, for the last several years has been building the network, the tool that we're rolling out to law enforcement. It's an information sharing tool, it's web based. And so we've been focusing largely on that. And at the same time, trying to share that message about missing adult alerts and why they're important. So there's been kind of a combination of focus the past several years. I've been involved with this, I think, going on what year are we in? 2026. I think I'm going on 4 years, I believe, working as a member of the stakeholder working group, which is their advisory group. And it's made up of, I believe we're up to 11 states now on the stakeholder working group. And nothing we do doesn't go through that group first. So we're always running through, like when we were building the network's getting ready to go live. But as we were building it, it came with input from all of these stakeholder working group members. And so we're trying to find out what the needs are. And we just brought on another SME to help, and we're trying to reach out to tribal groups to see what their needs are. So it's really at the very, very first floor level right now, but we're looking to really be amping it up in the coming years.
So, which I think is really important. So, for anybody who's listening, right? Let's say if you're in that subject matter expert role, right? And you're talking to an alerting authority today and you're trying to help them get prepared. I would say for Ashanti as a big part, but then for essentially doing what you and I have done for a long time, but they're starting. What would you recommend for them so that they can just start running, right? And not go through some of the trial and error that we've gone through.
Well, there is the Bureau of Justice Assistance has an Ashanti public web page. And so you can go there to get more information about Ashanti, to reach out to us, to contact us about the network. But my primary direction would be to go to your state alert coordinator or your state missing person clearinghouse manager. They're going to be your go to. They're the ones I talk to every week. Um, so they're the ones to go to if you need any guidance. We can bring training to your agency if you need to, or we can help coordinate that training at the local level with the contacts that we've established in whatever state that you're in. And so the resources are out there now. There's templates for plans that we can provide. There's criteria suggestions. There's a lot of tools out there available now.
No, I just appreciate, and to reiterate, trial and error, not fun, not the prescribed way. Go off of the not only the mistakes, but the successes that other people have had and how we have adapted to the new research and the messaging and everything that's come out, and start from there and just take off with your own path. So no, I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, Carrie, you've seen this space evolve. So if there's one thing you want every alerting authority to understand about this work for missing and endangered persons in general, what would it be? What's that one thing you want people to understand?
That there's a lot of alerting authorities, a lot of missing person alert coordinators have a lot of background and experience. And so when we decide to activate an alert, when we push the button or send it out or whatever lingo you want to use, there's already been quite a lot of thought gone into whether this should go out or not. So for the public, anybody who's not familiar with this, if we didn't need your help, we wouldn't push that button. And so we need your eyes on this case. We're embedding hyperlinks in there for you to be able to view photographs. Click on that link. If it is sent through the wireless emergency alert system, it's not a text message. It's not spam. You're going to be able to get to and view what we need you to view. And then my message too, and I almost forgot it. I can't believe I almost didn't add this in there, but do not disable those alerts on your phone. The wireless emergency alerts, the Amber alerts, the law enforcement warnings are critical for emergency coordinators to get word out to the public. Please don't turn them off. They are so life-saving. I can't even stress it enough. Every time I get a call from the public asking me how to turn it off, I cringe and I'm like, I really wish you wouldn't, and this is why, but if you really have to, this is how you do it. And so my message is always, we're not going to send anything out to you that we don't need your help with immediately. There's a lot of rules and regulations, as you both know, but the public may not know, around the use of that tool. And so we're not going to misuse a tool that is so valuable to us. And so we're not going to send out every single case that we don't believe is solvable. We're going to send you information that we need to find this person that's critically in danger.
Well, I think that that's an important distinction that you're raising about the regulations around when an alert can be issued, because there are no regulations from FEMA about when you can use WEA to issue a message. And that's the reason you can send something at 3 a.m, but you've learned from that. But it's all of the work that comes beforehand to determine this person is at the level, the threshold that they meet this threshold of danger. And you've done all of that background activity to determine that. And in order to find them and to bring them home or bring them to safety, that's the threshold that you've met, that triggers the ability to use WEA. And I think that's an important distinction, but it's critical because it truly shows that you're not using it haphazardly. You've done all of the work leading up to it, and now you know this is the point where you you are gonna use the most powerful tool available to get this information out to the public. And I do think that that is a missing piece in people's understanding of why WEA is used for some cases and not for others, and how it's used by different agencies. It
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that because it is, we get questions every time, why, and the example that you used, why is it used for one and not for the other? I can't even tell you how many times I've been asked that question. And that's how a lot of this legislation that we has happened because there's a misunderstanding that this didn't already exist already, and that's what the Ashanti Act was able to uncover as well. There was a misunderstanding even at the federal level that states didn't already have something, and we did already have something. Did we have to tweak some things to make it fit? Sure. And that's why it is a valuable act that we're now, rolling out and making these new tools to provide to alert coordinators. But whether a situation is determined to meet criteria or not, there has been a lot of thought gone into it at various levels. And so, again, educate yourself on what's available in your state and what the criteria is. If you believe that the criteria isn't all encompassing enough, then contact that alert coordinator and find out why, because there may be a very, very good explanation for why. Um, our silver alert was passed with that exact same mindset. It was passed because they didn't think that we already had something that covered that case type. And we did. We had the Endangered Missing Persons Advisory. It already covered that. They didn't feel like that was enough. The legislative process at the time didn't feel like that was enough. And so that's how a lot of these things are happening with the various alert types, is there's just not an understanding of what's already out there and available to be used.
So if people wanna learn more about Ashanti alerts, where do they go? Where do they get that information?
The Bureau of Justice Assistance, and it's Ashanti. There's an Ashanti Alert link on the Bureau of Justice Assistance webpage.
Great. Well, thank you, Carrie. This has been a really great conversation. I've been looking forward to our opportunity to start really digging in on these questions around the different types of missing persons alerts because, early in our conversation today, Eddie, you made the comment of, well, the research has been there. It hasn't. Not in terms of how to use wireless emergency alerts for missing persons. And not until more recently where, when my program at the University of Albany, when my research team started investigating WEA and helping to create guidelines for good messages, the first thing that the IPAWS team asked for was Amber Alerts. And we said, we can't start with Amber Alerts. And the reason was we didn't have a good academic approach to studying them to know that the way we were thinking about them took into account enough of the theory on what motivates people to take action, to know that they could also be applied to missing persons alerts in a way that it was consistent and it made sense. And so since that time, we have actually published one paper and we have another one under review. The first paper, led by Lauren Kane, and she reviewed all of the missing persons alerts that have been issued as WEAs and has identified the contents and how they're structured, and just a fantastic study that's available for anyone. Please reach out to us at the Alerting Authority. Happy to pass that study along to you. And the appendix actually has that list of all of those different kinds of alerts in it. So it's a really useful tool for anyone who's trying to get a grasp of what kinds of colors of alerts are out there. And the second study that we did, one of the things we asked was of our experiment participants is whether or not they understood the different terms that were used. Um, and just as you were emphasizing the need for, saying a missing abducted adult, missing endangered person, using that plain language becomes really important because people come up with some creative definitions for the terms that are being used in these messages that do not match the language that was created to represent those alert types. So another reason for us to really dig in and use plain language. But the research exists now, and I'm happy that the three of us are contributing to more research. Another paper that we're currently working on, which will go out for review this summer, actually describes how missing and endangered persons messages should be written, the language, the structure for those wireless emergency alerts. And it draws from your expertise, Carrie, and Eddie's long-term involvement in this area. And we brought in the person from NCMEC and local alerting authorities and state coordinators, and we got all of them to chime in on how these messages should be written so that they are the most effective and actionable. And I'm really excited about bringing that information, and maybe you can incorporate it into your training programs in the future, because it would help. It would really help to make messages more actionable across the board. And so, Carrie, I'm just really happy that you were here with us today. Thank you so much for sharing your insight with us.
Absolutely. I'm glad to be here. And I want to also add that the Ashanti page on the BJA website has also a link to or a list of all of the various state alert types, and also a link to contact that state alert coordinator page or their contact information directly.
That is great additional useful information. Maybe we can put that in the show notes at the bottom of the screen. So here at the Alerting Authority, we have ways that we can help. If you're listening to this long into our podcast, you know that we routinely do training, and we'd love to assist your organization. We can review your messages that you've issued, your templates that you're developing, so that you are better prepared to issue good messages for all types of hazards, including missing persons. We do policy assistance, and we have run the first warning boot camp with the second one coming in July, where you get personalized attention to develop your templates for all of the critical hazards that your organization faces. So please reach out to us. We want to help you to be more effective in your alerts. We draw on years and years of experience, as well as decades of research, and we're here to help.
And just a quick thank you to Carrie. You've been my friend for a long time in this, and we've been through a lot together because as much as we get into statistics, to names of alerts and everything else, every missing person is a person, not a statistic. And they deserve our absolute best effort, anything we can give them to help them get back to their safe place. And that's where, once you're in this space, you really start to understand, because these are families that you're dealing with, these are faces, and you want them to be returned. And so thank you for your work in this area. Um, I know it stays with you. And for everybody else out there doing this thanklessly, I'm thanking you very sincerely. And that's why we do the Alerting Authority. Because, as we say, every second has a story. Every missing person has a story. And we want to be there to help share yours and their story. So thank you for listening today.